What is consent? In this video, we will explore what consent is, what it looks like, what it is not, and how you can tell the difference. Consent is an agreement between participants to engage in mutually desirable activity. Consent is fundamentally about communication. While that can mean verbal communication, consent can also be given and affirmed through clear, nonverbal cues. And importantly, lack of consent can also be communicated through nonverbal cues. It takes an empathetic and attentive partner to pay attention to the messages, again, both verbal and nonverbal, that your partner is giving to you. Whether verbal or nonverbal, consent should always be clear and enthusiastic. In order to proceed with any interaction, your partner should be communicating to you an enthusiastic yes in both their words and actions. Clear consent means getting affirmative consent. Affirmative consent is informed, conscious, voluntary, mutual, and ongoing. While these first four may seem obvious, the last is often overlooked. Just because someone says yes once, this does not mean they have to or that you should expect them to say yes every time. Someone could have consented yesterday, last week, 1 minute ago, and they still have the right to refuse consent at any time. Someone can consent to a sexual encounter, but then refuse consent to a specific kind of sex act proposed during that encounter. Someone can consent, but then change their mind. And someone can consent to a sexual encounter, but then if they become incapacitated, they are therefore unable to continue to give ongoing consent. One should never assume consent, and you should continue to seek out affirmative consent throughout an encounter and/or a relationship. Consent cannot be given when someone is underage, unconscious, asleep, or incapacitated. Because consent should be enthusiastic and affirmative and should never be assumed, silence should never be mistaken for consent. Rather than proceeding until you hear no, you should only proceed if you receive an enthusiastic yes. If someone is incapacitated due to drug or alcohol use or due to mental or physical capacity, then consent cannot be given. Incapacitation means that someone's judgment is impaired or that they are unconscious, unaware, or otherwise physically helpless. Again, if anyone exhibits these characteristics, consent cannot be given and should never be assumed. You can tell someone is incapacitated if their speech is slurred, their eyes are bloodshot, their equilibrium is shaky, they are sick or vomiting, they are acting unusually, or they are unconscious. Again, if someone is incapacitated, if they are exhibiting any of these traits, affirmative consent cannot be given. And it's important to point out that your own incapacitation does not erase your responsibility to obtain affirmative consent. In other words, you cannot use the excuse that you yourself were drunk or high, and therefore you were not aware that you had not received affirmative consent. If you cannot be sure yourself whether you have consent or not, then affirmative consent cannot be considered clearly communicated. Again, consent is about communication, and in order to have successful communication, both participants must be clear headed and able to agree to being on the same page. Consent also cannot be attained through physical force, threats, intimidation, or coercion. Both parties must be willing, comfortable, and equally autonomous in order for clear, affirmative consent to be given. Non-consensual sex acts are violations of Whittier College's sexual misconduct policy. So, besides being morally wrong and acts of violence, non consensual acts are also considered instances of gender based discrimination prohibited under Title IX and therefore subject to investigation by the Title IX office. If you have questions about Title IX, reporting a violation, or seeking protections or accommodations, you can reach out to the Title IX coordinator, who is located in the Campus Center, Building A, first floor, within the Dean of Students office. Or you can seek out one of our deputy Title IX coordinators. You can also take advantage of excellent resources both on and off campus. And you can find the Title IX report form on our website here alongside a copy of Whittier College's sexual misconduct policy. So, to summarize, clear consent is a must. Consent must be affirmative, meaning it is informed, conscious, voluntary, mutual, and also ongoing. Consent cannot be given if one is underage, asleep, incapacitated, threatened, intimidated, or coerced. Any sex act carried out under such conditions would be a sexual misconduct violation according to Whittier College's sexual misconduct policy. Here at Whittier College, we want all of our students safe and thriving both on and off campus. Ensuring consent and exercising empathy towards your friends, partners, and peers is an important way you can help achieve this.